Okay, here we go. About to start installment number 5 of plastics. And we should be able to finish this up. But I wanted to finish with this one particular, before we get into the industrial plastics identification and or applications. You're going to want to get that sheet that I sent to you, that handout that looked something like this. You want to go grab that at some point because we're going to go over this list here. But at any rate, let's finish this up with, now we're talking about polymer crystallinity. Now we're going to talk about the actual molecular structure of the polymers. And there's 3 categories that they can be synthesized into. And the first one is called linear, second's branched, and the last one is cross-linked. And linear is basically just like stringing pearls. All those repeat units are just joined together end to end in a single chain, which means it's very, very long and flexible. And kind of like they say here, like spaghetti pasta that's been obviously boiled. And so it's very, not much breadth to it, but a lot of length to it. And so it remains very flexible, and many polymers are synthesized using this type of structure. And the other one is called branched, and this is actually, here's a picture I've drew a picture of a linear chain, kind of what it looks like, with all those little circles being the repeat units, whatever that might be. And we'll just call this ethylene. Here's an ethylene. Here's an ethylene. You say, well, how can both of them be? Well, because that's how they're synthesized. But anyway, in fact, this could be the linear could be a high density polyethylene, and this branched is a low density polyethylene, because branched polymers are synthesized with these little side branches. You see that they come off of this main chain. And of this main chain of a linear structure, but obviously it can't be compacted and packed as dense as the linear can, because all these little side branches, kind of like tree limbs and stuff. You can't stack a bunch of tree limbs with a bunch of little branches everywhere. So this is what happens, is it results in a lowering of the polymer's density. And the perfect example is a linear or low density polyethylene has the branches, whereas the high density polyethylene does not. It's just strictly a linear structured polymer. Now, the last one is called cross-linked. And cross-linked basically is where we have these branches, or these main chains here, and when they're synthesized, they form these, what they call a covalent bond between, a very strong bond between these main branches, and results in a very, very strong and rigid structures, obviously to the tune of, or thermoset structures, which are very rigid and very strong structures, 2-part systems. So when you combine a thermoset to 2 parts, it's a non-reversible reaction, obviously. So this is more like a thermoset type structure. These other 2 are more thermoplastic type structures. Okay, now let's now move on to the world of what I consider to be industrial plastics identification. The actual identification of the what we call the blends or the resins. Actual naming of them and giving specific examples. And the first one that's on your list is, I'm not going to try to spell it, but its short name is ABS, which is acrylonitrile butadiene styrene. Try to say that 3 times real fast. Acrylonitrile butadiene styrene. Okay, and you see that as the first on your list. But the best example I can give you is this little gem right here. This happens to be obviously a Ferrari Formula One car. that I happened to have won at some show many years ago in kit form, and of course I didn't put it together, but my son at the time was into all this stuff, and so he, thrilled to death to put this thing together. But this is all Legos, of course, and that is the plastic of all Legos is ABS, or acrylonitrile butadiene styrene. So just wanted to give you a heads up. Anytime you see a Lego, it's ABS, okay? And all right. And you know the properties, of course, as we go through this. ABS, and it shows you there, obviously good hardness, impact resistant, and really good product. Now it happens to be it has to be an amorphous crystalline structure, which means basically it's native. It is transparent. Okay, so they add all these colorant chips to these mixes to get all these different colors. Okay. Now this next one is a very interesting one, and probably one of the top 5, what I call engineering grade resins, and it is polyamide. Okay, polyamide. All right, and its trade name used to be prioritized, but is nylon. Okay. And but that kind of went away. Lots of people can now. This used to be DuPont's trade name for nylon. For polyamide. Nylon was DuPont's trade name for polyamide. Now this is one of the very good engineering grade resins. A lot of different applications. You can look there under the properties for the great toughness, good wear resistance, good chemical resistance. It is alloyed with glass, believe it or not. It's really one of probably the most widely alloyed of all polymers. And they put little glass, not really chips or anything, but particles in the material, and it really makes it so much more rigid. And it's used for all kinds of components and pieces, gears, bearings, automotive components, all different types of really good applications. And if this was class, I'd have a buku of samples for you to look at. But you'll notice it when its native color is sort of creamy yellowish color. Nylon is, but has one downfall, and this one downfall is something that all plastics actually suffer from, but by far this is the greatest culprit of it, and that is hygroscopic, which is and of course I didn't spell it right. I'm gonna have the H out there. Hygroscopic. It's the property that plastics have a tendency to absorb moisture, okay, just out of the air. And nylon is the worst culprit of all of the thermoplastics. It really absorbs moisture a great deal, to the point where it could make it, in a critical application, very dimensionally unstable. It could absorb so much moisture that it could actually change the overall dimensionality of a component or a part. So one has to be careful of that property when designing parts to be used with using nylon, so that it doesn't get in trouble. But usually it's not that big of a deal, because it's not put in such a high tight tolerancing applications. But just be aware that it does obviously absorb moisture and a great deal, and which is one of the reasons that I'll go ahead and point this out, even though this is a processing body of knowledge, that all thermoplastics, I may have mentioned this, but all thermoplastics, all melt processable thermoplastics that are going into any kind of processing equipment or machine have to be thoroughly dried, okay, because obviously we're going to be melting these, and most of them are all above boiling point of water. So if there's any moisture whatsoever in that polymer, and it's going to kind of have these little tiny explosions all inside this processing equipment, which is not good, obviously. So that's why all thermoplastic, melt processable thermoplastics have to be thoroughly dried prior to any kind of processing done on them. So something to remember. All right, this next one is polycarbonate. All right, polycarbonate. It has a trade name. The most familiar one is Lexan. You might hear Lexan. It's obviously very, very optically clear. That's what a lot of glasses lenses are made out. Very optically clear, but it's also very highly impact resistant. So it has a tendency to have those two properties, transparency and impact resistant. And that's why, when you hear bulletproof glass kind of things, that's basically what they're talking about. All of the military aircraft and most commercial aircraft, their canopies, their windows, etc., are all made out of this polycarbonate material. Okay, very, very obviously highly transparent, and then also extremely impact resistant. Now, of course, this is going to be I'll just put, this is an A, which is the obviously the amorphous, and then this is going to be the semi-crystalline SC, and this is going to be amorphous. So, at any rate, the next one, I'm not going to really talk about polyesters that much, but the next big one, of course, is the polyethylenes. And so we've already mentioned quite a bit about the polyethylenes already. And just understand that the three major ones that I told you about was LDPE, HDPE, high density polyethylene, and the big one is the UHMW PE, the ultra high molecular weight PE. And they all have a specific gravity less than 1, all right? They have very good toughness. You can tell when you have a piece of polyethylene, it's going to kind of have a waxy feel to it, all right? And that's normally what you can tell. And usually it's going to be this kind of color, white or a little bit off-white, like a little bit. But the interesting part about this UHMWPE is it is without a doubt, the most impact resistant of all thermoplastics, all right? And I have a sample of this that I pass out. A 1-inch piece was able to withstand a bullet from a revolver at about maybe 20 yards, maybe or less, and the bullet penetrated the UHMW, but not go all the way through. Then even dimple the back side of it. So it was extremely impact resistant. This UHMWPE, and it's also one of those thermoplastics that, even though it's classified as thermoplastic, which it is not melt processable. There's too much entanglement of all those chains that it doesn't allow it to completely melt and liquefy. So it kind of gets kind of like a jelly kind of a thing. It can be compressed in form, but it can't be melt processable. Okay, the next one I'm going to talk about is probably the second choice as far as really quality engineering grade resins, and it's called POM for short, or polyoxymethyl-ethylene, which usually people just call it acetal, spelled ACETAL, pronounced acetal, and its trade name is Delrin. You might have heard the trade name Delrin, and I'll kind of underline these trade names. Here's one. There's not really one for polyethylenes that much. Delrin is, of course, one from DuPont. And it's excellent. It is one of the better engineering grade resins. Has all the properties, all the qualities of nylon, the polyamide, but without quite nearly as bad of a hygroscopic property, the absorption of moisture. So it's very well used in all kinds of engineering applications. You can see You can see some of these applications here. Good heat resistance, stiffness, chemical resistance, lots of bearings, bushings, all kinds of really mechanical elements are done from either nylon or this acetal. Okay, polypropylene is another really good one. Polypropylene. That's another good, what I consider to be a good engineering grade resin. It has the lowest specific gravity of all the polymers at 0.9. It has good impact strength, as it says here, resistance, but it is the lightest weight of all of the thermoplastics, and so it obviously floats very well. But also, it has a unique characteristic of it being extremely resistant to fatigue. So polypropylene is highly resistant to fatigue, and they use them when they make what they call live hinges. You know, when something has to bend back and forth, you know, like this, but without a metallic hinge in here with a pin and such, but it just goes to bend and then go back and then bend and go back and go bend. I mean, that's obviously fatiguing that material, like we've talked about. But polypropylene has a resistance towards that fatiguing or that bending. So, like I said, when they're designing live hinges using polymers, this is always the polymer of choice when doing that type of thing. Okay, probably, and then two more to go really quickly. One of them is the we mentioned it earlier, the polytetrafluoroethylene, which has a trade name of Teflon. And that also is one of those, even though it's a thermoplastic, is one of those not melt processable thermoplastics. Extremely dense. It has a specific gravity, get this, specific gravity, right around approximately 2.2, all right, which is extremely high, okay, for most polymers, obviously, and because I think aluminum is approximately about 2.6. So it's this very, very heavy, very, very dense material. And we all know the properties associated with heat resistance, non-stick surfaces, that kind of thing. So it's used a lot in those kind of applications, and a lot of bearings, gaskets, things like that. And just as a note of a sidebar of history, it was actually discovered by accident. Okay. They weren't really looking for it, but they found it and decided that might be something they could use, and of course, they did and have. So, all right, and the last one is the old favorite of PVC, or polyvinyl chloride. Now, this, you're going to be amazed. This is an amorphous material. It is inherently transparent. As a matter of fact, your modern windshields, all windshields, have a very thin layer of PVC, or vinyl actually, in that windshield. It's called acoustic glass, is sometimes referred to. It helps to absorb the sound from outside, keeping it from getting quite as much inside the cabin of your vehicle. But and it's in all windshields. But it is a polyvinyl chloride. And again, it has a lot of good properties as far as it being rigid, but again, it can also be very, very flexible with being completely transparent. So it's a really good material, and of course you're familiar with it in its plumbing application. So those are the basic industrial type plastics, some of the names, some of the applications, the uses, and some of the inherent distinguishing properties. So at any rate, the next videos will be commencing with the polymer matrix composite series. So we'll start those more than likely sometime tomorrow.